years and as well, or licensed contractor and a licensed home inspector. Predominantly, I did restoration. I have dismantled, moved, and rebuilt buildings, and had the privilege of inspecting several thousand of them that are pre-1930s anyway. I've had occasion to go through Lisa's building, who I should back up. I've probably known Lisa 25 years, and I represent her as, if you will, boots on the ground here when she's out of town. Keep an eye on things and progress and what have you. I've been through the building top to bottom, inside out, everywhere that's accessible and some areas that aren't so accessible. And I can't find anything that suggests the building predates the early 50s. You know, everything is relatively consistent with that. There's very little substantive material on the interior, is wide open. I have taken out some of the wood floor that's been in back. It's kind of an oddity. The main body of the building is poured concrete floor till you get to the last 40 feet or so, and it's just joists set a couple inches above dirt. And termites have had their time with it, and as well, a lot of settlement in there, no moisture barrier, rather unusual. And I've been through the attic and in every scuttle there is, and there's just nothing there that suggests the date of the building predates the early 50s, if there's any question about that. Or if you have any questions on what else I may have seen, don't hesitate.
Great, thank you.
Surely.
If we may call you back up if we need to ask you a question. Ms. Lutz.
Yes, indeed, Maxine Lutz, and I'm representing Historic Beaufort today. This is something that you don't hear us say very often,
Right.
and neither does Mr. Jenkins. He knows we opposed his demolition just across the street, but we do support the demolition of this building based on the engineer's findings.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Ms. Lutz. Okay. Any other public comment? Anyone online wish to opine on this subject?
No virtual comments, sir.
No virtual comment. Last call for public comment. Seeing none, we'll close the public comment. Now it's time for the board to discuss, and we'll obviously ask the applicant or staff questions as we go. And this is for the demolition component only. So any vote that's made up here in the next time period is only related to whether this building should be torn down or not, or could be torn down. So open the floor to comments.
The only thing I have to say is my husband and I did go through this building ourselves about 3 years ago because we were looking to purchase it. And at that time, we felt it was not the best investment because it didn't look like it was salvageable. So I do know the shape. I agree that it's not in the best shape, especially if you want to add a second story. So.
Okay, any other comment? Go ahead.
Come on, Eric.
You're dying, I can see it.
Well, I don't want to be the first, so thank you for taking the first person to talk. We've taken some old buildings that were concrete walls and retrofitted them, and it is incredibly expensive. Some of those had foundations though, but I can certainly sympathize with what your engineer provided. You'd have to cut open all the CMU walls, put rebar in all of them, basically undermine the entire thing and pour a new. It just doesn't make any sense. It seems like the main takeaway is you want to do the same thing. The chassis that you have to work with is not good, and so you want to just do the same thing but with a good new chassis. The structure that's there is essentially just a big concrete rectangle. You're going to build a new concrete rectangle with new fenestration and what's been already approved. I don't see how this doesn't pass the intent of what we're here to do. I mean, it makes perfect sense to me. I would, contrary to what some of the comments were in the staff, I would keep the approved building as is. I think it was designed to honor the structure that was there and to let some of those parapets show off. I think you can still do the exact same thing. So I would be in favor with approving and then letting the existing proposal that we gave final approval to stand.
All right, well, we'll have a chance
Sure.
to bite that apple in a minute, whether that's what's presented or completely something different. We don't know yet. Let's talk about demolition on this end.
Well, I think I agree with what you said, the fact that it's non-contributing, and I mean, obvious. I understand the expense of building all those blocks and
Okay, so it's like yours.
I haven't been in the building, but I've been by there many, many times, reading the report from the engineer, hearing from the applicant and her consultant, seeing the staff, approval for this and the HPF consent. That's a green light for me.
Okay, I'm hearing support. My comments would be that, you know, generally these buildings, that building could be retrofitted and for something else, but probably not economically done for a two-story structure and the amount of money that would go into for the previous design, but for warehouse space or single-story construction type method, you know, we're absent of those type buildings in Beaufort. We don't have many. We have a very limited amount of space like that in the entire city. We have some limited industrial zones that allow that type of construction. We don't have many. I'm not in love with that building. I was a child when I grew up here and remember going to the pool hall in there and watching my dad drink beer and some other things in there probably happened, but it's lived its life and it has a new owner. I'm supportive and will support the demolition, and I'm happy that HPF feels the same way, so we don't have some opposition there or some, you know, community rub. The thoughts I have on that, though, is we don't have a termination point in our demolition ordinance currently. We're waiting on one. And the problem we have is when we authorize demolition and someone does not take action, and those buildings sit for a number of years for all kinds of reasons, it's a problem for the community. So and I'm not talking about your particular project, but we've had cases where demolitions were approved and the buildings still stand today because whatever economic reasons. I don't like giving demolition for something that's going to happen like that. I'd rather know that the project actually going to happen. So what I'd ask this board to do is if you support demolition and a motion's made, I would like to see us put a cap on the time period, and it can be, not that it can't be revisited, but basically, you know, a time period sometime in the future. If it hasn't happened, then the approval for demolition goes away. And then the applicant comes back. That gives the building another chance for maybe another owner if the numbers don't work out or so whatever happens. Development's tough. You don't know exactly what's going to happen tomorrow, but so that's the only caveat I'd have is a time limit maybe on the motion to demolish, and then we'll get into if we get that one off the table, we'll get into what the design might be.
Question to that, Mr. Chairman, has that been a case in the past where they put time limits? Because I know we just did the two over on Big Street, those were gone, but I don't remember having any time limit on those.
Yeah, and we talked about it. We have the ability to do it as a board, and if we get the votes to support that, then it will pass and it's supportive. It's something that's written in the new ordinance that hasn't been ratified yet. And so it's just a matter of time before that gets here. But I think that, you know, for precedent setting, we can do that. And it's no harm to the applicant, in my opinion. It just says that in some future date, if nothing's happened, then someone would have to revisit us again to tell us why and what happened, rather than us, the public asking why. Why'd you let them do that and then they didn't do anything?
You have a time frame in mind?
I mean, I think it's gonna take them every bit of 6 to 8 months to get this thing rolling. So I would say a year minimum. I mean, I wouldn't say cut it off any sooner than that, but
Right.
a calendar year, if it's not down by next year this time and the new project's, you know, getting ready to go, then maybe it's not gonna happen. 'Cause
Yeah.
here's what we don't want. We don't want another empty parking lot in the middle of a suburban center or urban center when that area is plagued with that right now. I mean, it's, there's empty lots all around it, and that's just attrition has happened over time. You know, you asked me 5 years ago when we were trying to city build and get teeth back in the mouth of the neighborhoods, I would have said tear it down and put housing all across that block. So we'd have more neighbors and more tax base. But we have flat lots there and across the street and then to the right of that building. So having vertical construction there is important to me as a taxpayer in the city to see that come out of the ground and provide not only the tax base, but the job opportunity, the business license fee opportunity that comes with somebody maybe doing a gallery in there. So I'm supportive totally of the concept. So let's get a motion on the
Yeah,
table.
May I ask one more question?
sir.
I have another one as well.
Can, to the staff, may I pose this to the staff? Is there a recommendation from the staff as far as having a time limit? And if so, what that time limit may be?
I think the proposed ordinance is 2 years. Just so you're aware. I think 1 year is reasonable.
I don't think 1 year is reasonable because we change up here. And if somebody, if this board make a, change in a year for some reason, then that expires to come back up, the consent may not be the same. And she's now, or they're put in a different position. I think, time goes by so quickly when you're trying to get permits and everything else. I think 2 years is a reasonable time frame, and the intent is still met. And hopefully, it seemed like they want to move forward, but to me, a year goes by so quick, I'm not sure that's a reasonable time.
I'm more in line with 2 years as well.
All right, well, that's why we have a Democratic board up here.
I want to bring up another thought. I think, I gotta think about how I want to phrase this. We're going through this exercise right now. It's kind of a unique exercise. A final approval for a project was already given. There's been some new findings that suggest that that's not going to work unless it gets demolished. Are we, there's, I guess, a couple questions. One question is, can you tie the condition of demolition to the building of the new structure? And the reason I ask that is, typically, if somebody brings a case to us for demolition, it's because they want to do something there that's different than something that's already been proposed. And so I see Kurt already is going to share some opinions with us, but let me continue to flesh out this line of thinking. If somebody comes to us and says, like Mr. Jenkins did, I have these 2 buildings, they're in terrible shape, they need to go. I'm going to do something here. It's not going to be the same thing. We're going to do whatever. And that's also not of concern, right? It's not necessarily the case that they're bringing a building that they plan on building at the time. They're just saying, I want to demolish these buildings. They're beyond repair. We consider the demolition on its own merit. Now, what they do with that lot after the fact is a whole separate discussion. It could turn into just an empty lot, and then they sell the lot. It could turn into anything that the zoning requires and passes muster with the city. Would we consider, in light of your comment, that you could salvage it, but it would have to be for a substantially different use? Does it make sense to just say yes to demolition without necessarily saying it's tied to this structure? Would we allow demolition in a vacuum for this project, for this structure, if we hadn't already given approval for a specific project to be built on it?
Well,
You get what I'm.
yeah, that's a good thought process you have. I think that it has happened before. The question is, not every applicant comes up with a plan to put something back. And years ago, this board tried to tie demolition to what's being built, and it was determined at that time that that's something really you shouldn't do. Maybe it was illegal or not legal or not proper, but the board since that time period stopped telling applicants, no, you can't tear it down till you tell us what you're going to put back. Because
Well, I could see that being fraught with problems as well.
it is. And the other thing is the economy changes all the time, and not every project that comes before this board ever gets built.
Right.
So we know that that's a fact, and we know that plans can change. So I don't think personally, well, first of all, approving demolition is just a separate issue.
Mhm.
If we approve tonight, the final with some tweaks made based on the earlier design, that too could go away. And the applicant would simply come back and start over with a new project, right?
Right. And what I guess, so here's a scenario that could happen. The applicant demolishes the building. In 6 months, the market environment is such that she decides not to move forward with building. Instead, she decides to sell the lot. Somebody else comes in and wants to develop something different. Would we be proud of the fact that we allowed that building to be demolished if it could have been salvaged for an alternate purpose? Now, I'm not arguing against demolish because I'm still in favor of it, just to be clear. But I think it's an interesting thing to think about. because that could happen. And if we approve demolish, but we're not tying anything to what happens next, then the ball's in the air.
That's the dilemma this board faces every year. And demolitions of non-contributing structures happen. Demolitions of the contributing structures actually happen, but each in their own merit.
Mhm.
I like your line of thought on that. I just don't think we can solve that
Mhm.
tonight with this case. I think what the new ordinance that's in line for demolition, we're talking about that, was done so because of some problems of, not being being given approval to be torn down and then not coming down is almost as bad as
Yeah.
tearing it down and making it a parking lot,
Right.
right? We don't want to see empty parking lots. If we need parking, but we don't necessarily need just them to be happen everybody where they have them, right? So.
I mean, I'd be comfortable with a pinky promise.
I'm
ready to get
Yeah,
started.
yeah.
Yeah, and I'm okay.
I just
with
wanted us to
your
think about
thought,
that.
yeah.
Eric, if I could just, and,
Yeah, what do you want to add to
and
it?
Mr. Sutton knows this, there was a project that was approved, I think, 3 years ago. I think a year before I got here. And essentially the attorney, it was approved conditional upon basically the demo permit could not be obtained until a building permit. That was the condition of approval for the new structure was
Hmm.
pulled, and their attorney challenged that, and essentially, the city attorney looked into it and basically made the recommendation that this board needed to remove that condition.
Mhm.
And so I know that's been a big discussion, but that seems to be the legal opinion right now, is that, tying it to a new, tying it to a new building permit or
Not appropriate. Yeah.
is maybe not a legal way to go about it.
And I could see that being, like the chairman said, I could see that being an issue as well. It's just, it still begs the same question of, this is a unique scenario, and I think each one needs to be thought about and opinions rendered on its own merit, but it's still, the larger question is still relevant, I think.
All right, well, we beat that up pretty good. Does anybody have any further comments related to whether you would want to demo this and add a time period to it?
I think 2 years is reasonable.
I mean,
That's
is
fair.
that legal to do? I mean, in light of that, I mean, is that enforceable? And what happens, what's the penalty if it's not, built on or completed in 2 years?
From what I know, it's appropriate for this board to make those kind of decisions. The one that
That staff.
staff spoke to was related to tying it specifically to something else. In other words, saying you can tear it down, but not until you build this, because that's what the problem is. But putting a timeline on it, all it does is puts a placeholder on it, and it gives the applicant, doesn't take it away the right to tear it down. They just need to come back, to extend the demolition, application. And do
If
your,
it's enforceable, then I have no problem with it, but I think 24 months is reasonable in light of our construction.
okay, and we don't have to do it at all. It's up to this board, 3 votes says you do it or not. I mean, I don't.
24 hours.
I got my tractor warmed up.
Yeah.
I agree because, we came across an incident this year, or last year, where a structure was torn down and none of us knew why, because they'd been given approval 10 years ago,
In the past.
and then we got beat up over it and we were like, well, we didn't have anything
Yeah, that
to
was,
do with it.
right.
So I think 2 years is fair and reasonable.
And just so the board knows that this did not technically have to come to HRB
Mhm.
level. So because there's a building already tied into the design, I think it's probably appropriate the staff kicked it to us to do. But a non-contributing structure, so that the public listening might understand, a non-contributing structure is at staff level approval is the only thing needed to take it down. But there are circumstances that warrant a bigger, deeper discussion, which I'll talk about when we get into the next part. But let's close out the demolition piece, if I can get a motion for that.
I'll make a motion to approve with the condition that it's done within 2 years.
Okay. All right, we have motion and second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll call for the vote. We'll start down here with Kim.
Aye.
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 Okay, so that's the milestone. Now we move into, we've already heard the staff and the applicant talk about the building, and I'll start off with a conversation of, okay, we have a building that staff has some comments on that was based on a shell build that was already there, right? And so that kind of drove the design of the building. So, but there are some questions that we need to get into about fenestration on this building and the massing. The scale stayed similar, got a little smaller, however, the mass got, the scale of the building changed a little bit. The only thing I have, they're asking for final with the building going down. I worry just a little bit that we give them final today and there's only been one, well, I guess if we count the rest of them. Do you agree that public hearings on the other meetings was justifiable, that the public knows what's happening? It's important that they understand when a building in Beaufort comes down and something's going back up, what actually it is. And the problem is that we didn't know we were going to be tearing this building down until this meeting. And now we're going to put in, you know, if it's close enough to what was there, I don't think it'll be a problem, but
Well, that's kind of my line of thinking is it's already been known that this building as presented previously has been approved and was gonna happen. In other words, if the structural engineering report came back positive, we know what's going back there, right? We just have this one tangent we had to take because, you know, the real world is not so clean. But my view is, don't change a thing. She's got a plan. She was ready to execute the plan. There's a hiccup. We solved the hiccup. Let's just.
well, I think
continue
they
moving
changed
forward.
it because of the fact they could take the old one down. It opened the door for some changes, which we need to understand what they are.
Yeah.
So you say don't change a thing, it's a new design. Now it's a new design, but it's very similar. But there's some positive things, I think. I think that
Mhm.
pulling back the second floor off the rear lot line and creating space for mechanical is a great improvement.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm trying to say is the changes that have been made are not materially different from the original one proposed, in my view, in a way that would make it something I couldn't just get behind, since we've already approved essentially the same thing.
Maybe we have a before and after shot. It could show a little bit more about that, but you know, you see the staircase on the, I want to call that the south elevation, but it's really, what's that, the west elevation?
That's an improvement.
And the changes were really reflecting what's required by Beaufort code.
Why don't you come, yeah, let's just go down the list of what you think.
Jeremy, are you flipping back and forth between the original and the new? Is that what you're doing?
Yeah, so what's on here is the HRB
This is the
change.
newest
This is the
one.
new, and if I go
And what it
back,
reflects is the required setbacks, the stair being clear of that southern setback. And what I think is a real benefit, despite it being a smaller footprint, is the ability to pull that first floor recess back in on that lower level, which I think is a much more inviting
Mhm.
street level approach. Other than that, you know, the aesthetic is very much what it was. So it was just realigning windows and doors to reflect the fenestration requirements. But basically, the intent of it was the same, but responding to the code requirements.
Thank you. Let's look at staff's comments and go down those, just so we understand where what Jeremy and his crew is looking at. They're talking about the first one on the west elevation, for example. Looks like the previous scene or scheme in this case. Now they're pulling the floor back. I guess we're still doing the same parapet wall. Remove, staff saying maybe remove this parapet wall.
Yeah, I don't agree with that.
Neither.
I like Jeremy, but I don't agree.
Do you like the marquee up there, the 1013 address in that parapet? 'Cause
Yeah, I
that's
think
what I'm
it's-
talking about.
I think it, you know, it honors the original structure that was there. It keeps some elements there that were familiar. And I think that's kind of in keeping with the point of, you know, if the existing thing's going away, we should have some kind of way of honoring what was there. I think that makes sense.
Mhm.
And if I may, candidly, it's not the same parapet. We did study it after the architect suggested going more horizontal, and it became very squatty feeling. And the parapet, although it is reflective of what was there, is really more of a design response to that street level residential unit above. What's changed is actually the dimensions of the parapet and the material, with that first level being the plaster with more of a decorative metal screening up above to kind of lighten the feel of that on the street level, street side.
Okay. And then in that same paragraph one, they talked about maybe extending the columns up. I know that would affect the east, the left and right windows, the barrel roof line. I mean, it may clear those down to a column, but that would make it more of a double porch scenario. You know, it is a Beaufort style, having the columns 2 stories. I'm not sure it's that important on this particular structure. And I'm not sure how it would affect that upper space.
And again, our feeling, having looked at those comments, is by extending that the full barrel roof out that far, again, makes it a little heavier than scaling down with the lower, smaller canopy at the residential scale.
Right. About, and not, the panels, I'm not sure about it. The screens, I'm sure that they can be done. I mean, with material pro, what is that material? Do you know?
Well, there's an image to the little insert image on the left of on the elevations piece right there, which is actually a laser cut metal. Right now, what I have found is sourced from China. I prefer to have all American made products. So I would certainly, once that is resolved, bring the material in for approval. Candidly, the way the software works, they weren't able to get that kind of softer design look of it. But again, I think it would be a very attractive artistic expression where that metal paneling is going.
All right, so that was conversation mainly on item number 1 from the staff. They also asking about how the columns, the fenestration of columns are identified. It looked like they're wrapped in metal. Tell us what those columns are.
The first level, the columns would be structural columns, but then with that same metal material wrapping around them so that the planters could extend and be grown up. And
That's for planting. Yeah. No, I don't know how. All right. We have in our guidelines for existing restoration and historic stuff, we don't allow metal columns of that, fabricated columns in that sort. This is a different application. I'm just trying to see what the pushback might be. We allow that on new construction, but we don't allow it to be put back on, contributing structures. It's not the same thing, but you know what I'm talking about? How they use a wrought iron column.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't think after they're built and there's a plant zone, a plant attachment material, I don't think that's as important of a concern, right? I mean, so if the columns are structural or CMU or steel, then that's the main focal point. But this decorative piece of it is just a little bit, I'm a little bit worried you're getting a little bit out of character of Beaufort style, too far. It's new construction. We get it. We want contemporary new construction, but at the same time, we want to, the way Milner wrote it the best, and I quote this often, is similar materials arranged differently. So when you take Beaufort materials, the fabric of Beaufort, and try to weave it into something new, we just don't see wrought iron. We don't see steel components used in construction in our neighborhoods. So when we see those being asked to be used, I think we need to be careful about that. But this may complement, are those steel windows?
yes,
Yes. So that,
well, they're aluminum. They're going to be bronze.
but there's a
aluminum,
bronze
yes.
metal. Okay.
Yes.
I mean, that
And
helps.
that's where I think it all kind of tied in with that decorative material to provide the screening versus a solid, and just trying to carry that through to the lower level where you would have structural columns anyways to have, that surround within the planter.
Have you done this detail before on other projects?
Nope, I don't like to do the.
Would you
finishes. Yep.
consider doing a mock-up? Because it's something like this, I think is important.
Yep.
I understand what the chairman's saying. I like the fact that it's sort of a blend of how you do things. I think it'd be very interesting. But maybe it's because it's such a reach, you might, require a mock-up just to have staff approve that or give some.
Well, they're,
consent.
they're asking for final tonight, so what we want to do is give them something they can work with and move this thing along if possible. I just think, it's only my comment, and I would like to hear what the board thinks more about those, and if any other comments related to fenestration of the front of the building. So right now, we got over the fact we had a barrel roof, we
Right.
got over the parapet on the original design, got all through that. But there are some subtle changes to this, like that front elevation, weren't the doors more centered before? I can't remember. They were always to the right, asymmetric, okay.
If I can continue,
Go ahead.
I think this is much improved design. I think it's more refined. I know you're working with existing conditions and you're limited in that. Here, you've looked back to that and now you've looked forward with less constraint. And I think you've done a very successful job in repackaging this.
Thank you.
I think if you have something that's sort of out there that hasn't been done, maybe again, having a mock-up to have for staff to
Which
approve.
we will be doing with a couple of the other finishes that were approved. The intention was when we are, closer into the project to certainly have those as a real
I would
mock-up.
be, I normally I'd like to agree with the staff. I think number one, I would disagree with their requirements, but 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, I think is reasonable because just asking for information that's not on the drawings.
Mhm.
And if that's satisfactory, I think that we should require a mock-up. I think it's a very nice design. I think it's going to be a huge asset to that area.
Yeah, so what you're asking is for another level of scrutiny, which is fine,
And
but we,
staff, but I
Mhm.
think we got.
Staff level.
Comfortable with staff doing that.
yeah, I
For
mean,
conditions 2 through 6, we're
2 through-
scrapping condition 1.
Yeah, they would have to provide 2 through 6,
yeah,
which
yeah.
I think you would probably doing anyway. I know you're probably trying to get this done, and I understand we may be reaching a little bit to have final here as opposed to going back.
but
around.
one of the problems with asking for mock-up, just in general, is we don't do it for all applicants. And there's been some tremendous pushback when you tell an applicant, go down there, we don't know exactly what brick, for example, we ain't talked about their brick yet. We've asked applicants to put a brick wall up somewhere so we can go look at it, see the mortar car.
She agreed to do it.
I know, she agrees, but I'm just saying, she'll do it, but,
Well,
later it's like, you made me put a
I
mock-up,
think
then you
it's part of the
reject it.
process.
I asked
Kimberly.
that only because the reason you stated, because it is a departure, but I think because it's a commercial application. And it's just, to me, it's refreshing. It's just same thing, just repackaged. But if there's any question, before you go do the whole building, do a mock-up and then assess it at that point before, it's after the fact. That's my only thought there. I'm trying to push this, because I think it's not pushing, but I think it's a nice design.
Suppose if
And I really like that idea.
staff had concerns with
that
it,
Lower level back.
we would send it back to you for maybe a change after certification or something of that nature. If they're, Jeremy, especially in Maria, were like, hey, this is.
Yeah, well, I think if staff first of all, if the applicant has to make a change, we want you to go back to staff and let them know. If staff believes it needs to come back up to this level of scrutiny, wonderful. But we want to give a lot of levity to staff to do the work, the day-to-day and work without bringing to a board for simple decisions. So if it can be handled at that level, that's great, because I don't have to see, I need to go down and look at a mock-up to see if I like it or not. I think staff can do that.
And that may not be, required. I'm just, again, trying to see how that may help to check the box, so to speak. And I think, and I missed the tour last week or 2 weeks ago. Clearly, our consultants are very qualified in what they're doing. And I think between the staff and, the outside consultants, if they have any issues, they'd
Well, I'm
probably.
personally good with that, with your concept. I'm fine with that. Want to make sure, so it sounds like 2 to 6. At least 2 of you have said that
Yeah, and I think if there was a feature that staff felt strongly against, they wouldn't have made it a condition of just looking at it. It would have been that they recommended it changed.
Oh, I'm sorry. I say it 2, but I think 2 ought to be modified to what I just said. So my apologies for that. So I'm sorry, Eric.
So how would you modify number?
Well,
2?
I included 2 through 6, but I see that the staff recommends some of these panels be similar design. Again, I think that goes back. I defer to, the architect and the applicant come up with that design. And I'm less concerned that they would not get it right, than having them go back and, simplify something. I think that's what, possibly again, a mock-up could help to alleviate all those concerns.
All right, was
Yeah.
there,
The only problem, my comment on having the mock-up in the positive aspect of it is that for the public to see. If we're making such a deviation in the design, of something that's not Beaufortonian architecture, then maybe we do have something that the public can see rather than just being accepted at the staff level, because that way they never see that.
I can't go that way.
That's a whole nother.
Yeah, I don't want to open this up to a dialogue that,
No, but I mean, you know what I mean?
I
They
know.
don't get to see it.
yeah, that's the whole problem with mock-ups, is who's it really for?
Yeah,
That's why we ask the full package to come in and we have a staff review it so that we get all the information up front. And then there's questions and, it still resonates with me that we had an applicant put in brick walls with mortar.
I saw
I
them.
don't know if anybody ever even went down and looked at it. I don't know if the public even knew what it was.
I saw it and
So-
I thought that was the silliest thing I'd ever seen, especially when the color, it was like, we just need to see the color.
Okay, so let's stick on this one. Where are we going with this?
Well, so I guess a question for Jeremy is what would, if we said, let's just say hypothetically, we said approve with conditions 2 through 6. What could the applicant provide for number 2 or number 4 that would make the staff say no?
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yep. And another way of asking that question is, what's the point of number 2 and number 4?
All right, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, it's getting a little delay. For number 4, I think that's really just about mechanical screening. There's no detail. I'm inferring what I think is there, and that's some kind of a louvered or slatted system. I think that's the simple solution. We just don't have enough information on that. For this here, I think y'all's conversation has been good. I think she's talked about that the intent would be something like what you see on the screen here. It may not be exactly that, and I think that if y'all are comfortable with that, then we know exactly where this is going, and I think that's fine. If it's something more simple, I don't know that it needs to be lattice like was illustrated, right? So she said that no, the computer program, she's just indicating a kind of a hatch, so to speak, of something that may be a little more decorative. I'm comfortable with the direction of a mock-up. Now, the mock-up doesn't necessarily have to be they go out there and put a column up and they wrap it. A mock-up could quite simply be get a panel from the manufacturer or whoever's going to make it and let us look at what that actually is. It doesn't have to actually be an installed item. It can just be a sample.
Okay. I got that.
Yeah, so I guess, but the same, if we see here what the intent is,
Mhm.
what could she provide that would make you say no?
I don't know, but what I
Okay.
saw here was final design to be determined, and then here's an image. It just is a question, right? For me, it's a
Right.
question. Is it this or is it something else?
Right. So
That-
so you just want to see the final cut sheets essentially to make sure it's in line with what's being presented.
That's right.
And I think that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back to your Milner doc and pull it out, it doesn't necessarily apply here, but it shows what not to do. And there's some wrought iron column pieces that would
Mhm.
actually would work here for the purpose. But, and you can still buy them, but if you put them on here, then we'd tangibly go back to the document and go, well, this is what you're not supposed to do.
Mhm.
So we want to be careful. We're not creating a situation where we're telling them to go out and do something, and then we don't really look at our own guidelines to say, you're not supposed to do that. We just don't have a lot of wrought iron metal in Beaufort. Charleston has some, but we lost what we did have. We got a few pieces left, but we don't have much in Beaufort. Okay, I think we beat that up pretty good. But I don't know if we got into all the meat and potatoes about any changes on the structure or is anything y'all concerned about?
Well, I have a process question. Did we get any input on this applicant from any of the public? Because I think they opined only on the demolition, right? Just,
Yes, we might have,
I'm sure.
Well, that was your initial question was, if we already gave approval to the initial project, that was kind of what we started talking about. Is this similar enough that we could just,
well, that was the piece I started off
Mhm.
with was,
Okay.
is, and maybe we'll just ask staff, look, I don't have and I don't think you have a problem opening the floor to public comment on this
Okay.
at the moment. If staff believes that's appropriate, or, maybe Maxine could tell us if HBF has an opinion, or maybe she doesn't know and can tell us later.
I do know, I was at the meeting where Kim came and explained the new design to us, and we were very much in favor of it. This whole thought of just doing what was approved before was not something we discussed, so, but what we have seen is something that we think is perfect for that spot.
Y'all didn't see any showstoppers at this point.
No,
Okay. All right, that probably answers
2
that,
for
right?
2 with the HBF today. That's
yeah.
awesome.
That's winning.
Tide has turned. Thank you, Maxine, for that. Any other material-oriented architectural components of this that we need to discuss? Anybody have any questions about the rest of it? Because they're asking for final, when they leave out of here, you know, they could demo this next month and building could start building and then it's over for us.
24 hours.
Huh?
Hope they go right forward and make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, normally we get into things like, we did this already on the window. The windows haven't changed from the type of window.
This size of the, just to create a better pattern, we had a lot of, restrictions.
See, the massing changed on the building. That's the point I'm getting to.
Yes, with using the previous structure, the existing pilasters were not on a symmetrical scale, layout. So we went through knowing this is new construction without those parameters. So we just changed the pattern and simplified the sizes because we had a larger variety of sizes previously. But it's the same specification of window.
So it looked like pulling the building in a summary, pulling the building in front and back, straightening out the massing of the windows, moving a set of stairs further to the one side or the other.
Into
Yeah,
under
into
the roof
building,
cover.
yeah.
All right, so moving us on the right side, looking at the building, you move those stairs kind of out of that property line into the back corner of the building.
To
That's an
respect the
improvement.
setbacks. Mhm.
You added the columns, after you moved the front of the lower section, you added columns to get the building off the sidewalk. The columns still land and the parapet front will still land at the 0 lot line at the sidewalk.
They're actually they're back even from the.
So they're
zero.
not they're not 0 lot line. Okay.
Correct.
So that's an improvement. It didn't move anywhere to the east towards the
To
street.
the east, to the east is to the adjacent property, and that respects the 10-foot setback requirement. On the north side, it is remains on the lot line.
Where the parking is along the street, right?
Right.
That's it. See,
Well, the easement,
yeah, the easement, okay. 'Cause you got me confused with the northeast, south, and west on this particular building, because to me, Charles Street goes toward the south,
yes.
so the elevation showed opposite.
The south elevation faces the adjacent lot. The north elevation is on Congress Street.
Yeah.
The west elevation is on Charles.
I don't think it's written that way in your drawing, but
Oh,
it's fine.
apologies.
Is there a reason the light well is higher on, on the second rendition?
No, it's the same height as it had been.
Well,
approved.
it's noted as 30 feet in September. And as of 12, 30 and a half. I mean, it's just 6 inches difference, but I just wondered why there was a difference in the.
I think it was just clarifications on some of the, as we were going through drawing. Again, we have not started on construction documents or anything. We're just trying to, get this intent approved and, we're trying to respect any of the comments as we go through things, which I know the overall height had been a concern.
Yes.
So it's just kind of tightening down on those things as each time we go through.
Okay,
the
so
drawings.
it will be a little bit higher than what we approved in the preliminary and the,
Yes.
okay.
All right, I don't have a problem with what I've heard. Any other comments related to pieces and parts? Ma'am,
So my head's kind of going. I think, I love the fact that it's pulled back from the sidewalk. When I first looked at the front elevation, I looked at those columns and I'm like, I got like this weird kind of New Orleans vibe. Oh geez, sorry. There I am, sorry. And the whole iron thing was kind of, I wasn't sure about that. And the biggest thing was that my eye went right to the top where that screen is. And I didn't think that I wanted that to be where my eye went. I don't know if it's the color.
Unfortunately, I think it's the graphics, because again, my draft person was having a hard time kind of softening that. We wanted to show that it's, has a pattern to it.
Looking like at that much contrast in color.
No, it would be a bronze, of the color palette we had, there was a kind of a softer bronze.
Right.
So with the parapet cap, which is the darker bronze, that would be the lighter metal color that we had proposed on the exterior.
I mean, I love the idea of like plants growing up the columns. I think that could be really pretty and organic, but I don't know. I mean, I think it's just the material. Like I'm curious too, to see what exactly that entails.
And as I said, I'm as eager as everybody else to get an actual sample. As I said, the products that I have discovered thus far are imported from China, and that's not a direction I want to go. So again, we're kind of ready, waiting for the green light to really jump in and tie a ribbon around all of these decisions.
all right, any other comments?
The rafter bearing went up 6 inches. I think that's what caused everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a,
That's what I was
I
just
bet
looking
that's a
at.
code thing.
Probably
first
is.
It
floor
was
to
a
be 12.
requirement from the first floor
Yep.
and then go.
That's
up.
what it caused. That's, yeah.
That's what I was just looking at.
Yep.
So, yeah.
All right. I don't hear enough information to say we're not there. So,
I'm good with it. I guess, Mr. Woods, would you just modify number 2 to say that they just need to provide the cut sheet? Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, I mean, mock-up cut sheet, that's fine. If it's a new product, they can provide a cut sheet, absolutely.
well, that covers it if you just approve it as written, except for number 1, right?
Well, I
Yep.
think it would still be subject to staff
But it says-
review. I mean,
It just says provide further detail. That's what we're asking, right?
right, well, I mean, if we're gonna provide detail, we should have some say in what's given. I mean, if we need more information, would the staff not have the ability then to opine on that information when
Well, if
provided?
you want staff to do it, I'm fine with that. I'm just saying that the way
Right,
the
right.
staff wrote it is they're asking for more information on that. So it's really not something we would say have to modify that comment on comment 2. The only one I think we have to modify or leave out is number 1.
I think, yeah, my thought would be leave out number 1. And then 2 get changed to say applicant to provide cut sheet of perforated metal to staff. And then 3 through 6 remain.
That's what it says now.
Is that a motion? If it is, I'll second.
I'll make a motion to approve with the removal of the first condition, keeping conditions 2 through 6, but modifying condition 2 to say applicant is to provide a cut sheet to staff for approval.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second on the table. Any further conversation? Hearing none.
You go first.
Yes, let's let you go first.
Aye.
Aye.
I support
Aye.
that.
Hi.
Okay. Been a long journey. You got there. You see how we do things here, right?
Brady, Eric,
What was the question?
who seconded?
Oh,
Who seconded?
Well, good luck with your project.
Very eager to get started, so.
Oh, I'm
you
sure.
pinky promised, so
Yes, I did. And I stick to it.
now we
Okay.
have your letter.
Yes, so next is the discussion item. You ready? Okay, it is in your packet.
Yeah.
It's the last, if you reviewed the Dropbox, the electronic version.
The last page in the packet.
It's the last page.
I'm looking.
I'm sorry.
Sure.
Thank
Good
you.
luck.
Thank you.
Good luck.
That was,
Was it attached to the demolition thing?
I don't
Yep.
see it. You found it? No, you
No,
didn't.
that's not it.
All right, here, we'll share this one.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't get it.
Why don't you just,
I just don't know if it was, if that letter was printed out though, Kurt. I have it on the
oh,
Dropbox.
so yeah, it was emailed to you, but I don't know if Julie printed. Hopefully that's okay.
Thank you.
what,
It's a
would
discussion item. There's,
you want to give us the bullet points?
I will give you the bullet points.
Thank you.
No one reads anymore anyways.
I read it.
We didn't get it.
Sorry. So if you've been following the exciting trial in Beaufort regarding the parking garage,
Oh,
one way or the other, I really, I'm not going to opine it's not about that. It's about the actual case itself. And so the court was pretty clear. And again, this is, this letter is a reaction or policy proposition is reaction to that court ruling, is that the court found that the concept plan approval, the preliminary plan approval, or preliminary design approval, and the final design approval were three separate vested actions that the HRB took with that specific case. So it's likely creating a precedent in South Carolina. And so as you read at the packet, that's been, I know when I started here, I had some concerns like my first few months because I'm not used to that either. And I was told that only the final was a vested approval, and that the conceptual and preliminary were not considered vested. There's nowhere in the code they were vested. There was no case law that they were vested. Well, I think Beaufort has created potentially that case law that complicates that. And so I think we need to start to change based on that case law. And it makes some sense when you look at it, because when you were doing concept and preliminary, you were giving them a decision letter with conditions or recommendations, but often conditions of approval with each one of those steps. So you were, I think the courts felt like, hey, you were vesting this project in some way or another. And so because that creates so many complexities legally for challenge, that you have a project that maybe, and as you were stating, Mike, like a year from now, you could have given this project a conceptual today. And she went to preliminary in a year, which she could under the current policy. And, all five of you or three of you changed, and the new board members completely disagreed with that direction of that project. They have a vested interest in that conceptual approval. And so there's a natural legal challenge right there, right? And so I think what's being proposed here is that in the future, we are doing the HTRC, and that has helped a lot, I think. But really, people still need to get before you for some of these major projects like Miss Honeycutt's, right? We really guided her, as you could tell from the HTRC. That project changed dramatically, the HTRC. But still, in some of these major projects, I still think they kind of need an HRB discussion because, they're putting a lot of money and time and effort into it. And also, to do all of those final mock-ups, like you said, and designs is very expensive. And so there's a real utility, I think, and financial cost to savings to bring them to you for discussion. And so I think what I'm proposing is that basically, instead of doing a concept preliminary and final, that you go to a work session type of format for these major projects. So let's say it was her project, that's the easiest one to do. Instead of a concept preliminary final as you did with her, you would go to the first item on the agenda would be a work session with discussion on this Charles Street project. You would make discussion for however long you'd want. You could make recommendations, but they're not going to be formalized. There's not going to be any there's gonna be a report, but she's not gonna get a letter. You're not giving her, you're just giving her discussion.
How,
Makes sense? And then when you go to the final, then the final, you know, instead of you're probably gonna have to rely more on staff than what you did today, but you're also gonna have to think of tabling items more often. You know, if there's some, let's say that parapet change was a major change for the majority of the board. You weren't prepared to approve it or to give it to staff to approve. You know, the best thing would have been to just table it to the next meeting and ask them to bring it back to you. So I think that's really the kind of the goal here, is to say that we have to get away from the concept preliminary final, just because legally it's now becoming somewhat of a risky proposition for really everyone.
So they
involved.
could sue us after each.
Yeah, I mean, they could sue you after each, and you know,
But
boards aren't continuous.
And I think
Is
the
that-
taxpayers pay enough in lawsuits.
whoa, I think we're getting ahead of ourselves. The reason the court ruled that way is to protect the owner from getting dragged across the coals. If you expend thousands of dollars, potentially tens of thousands of dollars, hiring engineers, consultants, and architects to create some concept, and then you go to some board and they give you a conceptual approval, they're basically saying this project in a conceptual form is good to go. Maybe we change the details on your material, maybe we change some of the colors, maybe this or that, but in general, you can build a structure that's like this. And if they then come back 8 months later after studying and doing more work, and all the board changes, and they say, we don't like any of this, that really screws over the homeowner who's already spent all this money. And I think the judge has probably rightly assessed that, no, a vested right was given, that you need to work within the boundaries of what the conceptual approval was given. And I think that's a good safeguard for the homeowner. I think that's an appropriate safeguard, especially if they own it and they've expended all this time, money, and effort. So I think it makes sense.
Sure.
And I also,
I thought we were doing this.
we are doing that. He's saying that initially we were under the impression that granting conceptual and preliminary approval did not give any vested rights. A
That's
court
correct.
has now determined that they do give vested rights to some degree, which I think makes sense.
Yeah.
And I also think that we don't need to shy away from doing that simply because they've decided that a right has been vested. I think the point of the judge saying that some type of vested right has occurred is to protect the owner and their time and effort, and allow it to not slip backwards. If instead we move to a model of, well, we're going to be afraid, we're just going to not give vested rights until the project is perfect, then you can just be in work session in perpetuity.
Yep.
And people can still turn over, and that screws the homeowner again, because you do work sessions with one group, they give you recommendations, then you come back 3 months later, and some of us has changed, and now the recommendations are totally different. So I think you have two problems there. One problem is you're trying to skirt the intention of what was just ruled, and so I think it's you're going around the intention of providing some kind of safeguard for the homeowner. And two, I don't know that would, I'm not an attorney, so I'm just guessing, but I don't know that would stand up to scrutiny either, because you're then having, even though you're calling it a work session, in effect, you're saying, oh, well, we're just going to call it a work session. We're not going to give you a letter, but we're telling you our recommendations. They are then spending money, time, and effort in using those recommendations to affect an outcome. You could probably make the argument that even though you're not calling it, you're calling it a work session, that you're giving them some direction that could then vest. I don't know. Some attorney might be watching this and they're like, no, Eric, you're an idiot. But that would be my thought, is that it makes sense to me that the judge ruled that there's some type of right vested. Two, in light of that, I don't think we have to change anything. I don't think that we
Well, I
necessarily
think,
need to.
the one thing I need is, that's in the report, that, we don't have the conceptual preliminary in the code. And so that's, I think, the big thing that you left out. I don't disagree with your reasoning, but it's not in the code right now, right? And so I know that the proposed change has a process that's actually in the code and what's needed for each stage, right? And that would make more sense, but until we have that,
You're saying we don't even have the power to give a conceptual vested right or preliminary because that's not in the code.
it's not
We
in the
can only
code.
give a final.
And there's
approval.
nowhere in state statute that says
Yeah.
concept, preliminary, or final for a
Right.
So
design.
what do you,
Okay.
All right, let's get some other opinions up here.
so what do you do when you have an applicant come before you now? You have a technical review. That in effect is another review. You could call it conceptual, you could call it technical, but
Mm.
it's the first line
Right.
of observation, right? And you
Yeah,
give them
probably.
feedback that they then come to us with. So that you already have that in a de facto, right? I mean, maybe not in front of us, but in front of,
I don't think it has any binding power, that's why. But you're a discretionary board making the decision, so when you give them a decision, you
All
give
right,
them.
but it seems to be
So-
working.
I
From what
think
we're
it's-
hearing, that process has improved this process up here. And I've only been here a year, but I think that process has been not much older than that. So that seems to be working. So why not try to implement something or continue with that and call it whatever it needs to be, or give that some teeth? I think it has shortened the conversations we've had up here and helped folks get through that and navigate that much quicker. And anything we can do, in my opinion, short of just, giving everything a green light, I think we need to be prudent in helping get getting toward as much efficiency as possible.
We need to protect the applicant and the city as we move forward.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Kim, you have any thoughts on this?
Well, this, of course, I'm the new one here, so I'm just kind of listening. I do like the idea of like sitting down and having a discussion, though. I think that would be very, very beneficial for the applicant, for sure.
All right,
Again, it seems because HBF is sitting at the table, right, at the technical review?
Yeah.
That's obviously, it must be working. I mean, everybody seems to be generally pleased with how that's.
Yeah, we're not changing that. This is the.
I know, but
your
that is
conceptual
the
and
first, that is the conceptual.
He's saying that is essentially, that's the first conceptual. That's the conceptual.
Right.
all right, hang on. Let me get my word in here and then we'll close this out. I'm agreeing with Eric. I don't, not understanding it's not in the code. That can be fixed. That's got to be fixed. Council's got to step up and do something and straighten that out. I believe we have to give vested rights as we progress if we have multiple meetings. You cannot green light something and then the next meeting say, we didn't really mean that. Now you got to change it. So we have to find a way to be best. I don't like the idea of a workshop at this level. You don't need us if you want a workshop. Okay, because the workshop is open. We have a public comment period, I'm sure would have to be in there. Then everybody gets to opine on somebody's project and they leave not knowing what the hell they're supposed to be doing when they get back.
And if I may, it's designed by committee and that's not the
And
intent.
that's not what we want. That's not
Exactly.
the intent of the code. That's not intent of the state regulation on how boards are set up. So if it's a problem at the council mayor level, okay? And they need to fix that. So that's what I'm hearing. If it's not in the code, I don't see how that happened, to be honest with you, because the board was established before the code was established. The HRB's been here a long time. And so if a lot of stuff was pulled out, I know, I mean, I sat through many years of it, but the point is that can be fixed and that should be expedient and done as properly. But I like the HTRC and the TRC. I think that has improved things a lot with communication and that applicants come in and get a better direction before they sign up to come in to see us. But I don't want to see us go into a situation where we're just opining on it and you get no meat, no clarity from us.
Okay, that's fine. Like, again, we have a change to the code that actually creates conditions and findings for conceptual and final that took a lot of time to create at the planning commission. So, if that ever gets adopted, you'd have that. So that if you don't want to go this way until that gets adopted, I think I need a majority of you here. We will have to go forward with conceptual and preliminary very cautiously, knowing that you all are aware now that, if
Rights vest.
I think it's okay.
You've
though.
given them a conceptual approval. If at final approval, you don't like it all of a sudden, or, you know, it's a different person, you know, it's
Well, look-
John Smith has replaced Rita and he doesn't like
I think that's good
the
though.
plan, you know, they need to, you're, you know, you're kind
I'll
of,
give you an example. Let's talk about how the process really works, all right? Somebody comes in here and wants to do a, moderately large building, which had a few in the last number of years. And they come in there and they want to do it by the new code at the max height, which is apparently now about 53 feet, if I do the math right, for the last building. Okay. The code says, the old code said no higher than 50, and then the board had review based on Milner, which gave us a storyboard of this is appropriate, this is not appropriate, and then it was all subjective after that, all right? And it originally said cannot be more than one or two stories different from the adjacent historic building. See, that's got lost in the translation in my mind.
Yep.
So if you go back to Milner, it's supposed to be compared to the historic building adjacent to it. Well, if there's not one, what's the code? Anyways, so applicant comes in and does a 53-foot building, but he doesn't have all the details and he's asking for conceptual. And we say, okay, in that context, it fits. And then the very next meeting, they come in with a 53-foot tall building and this board sits here and tears it all apart and says, oh, that's too big. And the public says, that's too big. You've already given them at conceptual
yeah.
that's, so they're starting to design around
Mhm.
that size, right? And then they're putting in the massing. Then they're putting in the fenestration, right?
Right.
I think we gotta be careful because that's important. You don't want an architect, you don't want an owner spending money they don't need to spend simply because we screwed up. If we say that conceptual, and I think it's important on big buildings, get a conceptual in here and let's look at it. And,
Okay.
but when we make the decision and vote on it, it stands.
Yeah,
Right.
so just be cautious because we'll try to stay with just massing scale suitability for the, yeah, right. Once when you approve that, then like you said,
Mhm.
that's
Yeah,
that.
it's set.
Preliminary, you're getting into the details, so.
I think that's
So
okay
with
though.
the,
Yep, agreed.
with the Lynn King project, I know that's one I was here. And, you know, the first one came in kind of looking like institutional kind of building, but you kind of left, I think you turned it down, then you proved it, and then I think people were like, oh, the design, as it went through the process, it kind of changed a little bit, so.
It's a hard line. I
be
mean,
aware.
this board has suffered through the years watching new members come on and some people not liking things that were done before. But the reality is it is democracy. We vote, the vote on even on conceptual. I think it sticks and I'm okay with what I'm hearing to be the court consideration that there's, that you have some rights after going through the process.
Yeah,
But
you must.
I've been there.
I just think it's incumbent on us, whoever's sitting up here, to maintain consistency. You cannot change your mind at will up here. You know, they have the right to take away, like you're saying, an understanding if it's 53 feet going to work, then I'm going to make that. That's what I'm going to design to. It's not going to be 48 feet next time. It's not going to be anything else. That's a takeaway. And I think you're right, Kirk. You know, especially in a large building, most of the stuff, it's more perfunctory than that, but something that's very controversial, set the tone, give them understanding of the takeaway that this mass form, blah, blah, blah works. And then the second part, preliminary is more design development, is the refinement of that. And by final, like today, when, we're looking at final, it's set. We shouldn't go back and undo anything. It should just be a minor tweak or check the box. Let's make sure we, have the information like they had at the staff comments. That's the process. And I think that's what we have to, but whoever the five are sitting up here, you can't come up here with a wham and say, you know what, I traveled to Europe last month and I want this thing to look like something I stayed in, so that's just, I know that doesn't ever happen, right?
Yeah.
We can't let those things happen.
A final note, so if we continue this process and with the courts, really your conceptual approval is kind of like, since I'm a planner, it's like a rezoning. It's when you do
It's like a
that,
what? Say again?
it's like a rezoning. That's the big decision. So if you really don't, if someone's proposing whatever it may be, like this structure, a conceptual, you need to table that, or if you don't like it, you need to turn that down, because that's the most important step. So you just need to take that away if we're going to continue this process, because when you approve that, the details really aren't that important, once
Right.
you approve and then hide it.
It's almost
Right.
like you're approving a
You
change of
basically
use.
approve the project, and so you should just accept that you can make, the details will obviously make it look a lot better or fit that vision, but you've approved that 3-story or 4, you know.
Yeah, you're saying you could do a 3-story, whatever,
Right,
mixed
so-
use building here, but details forthcoming and we'd like
Yeah.
to finalize that. Which I think is fine. I think the staff will have to help keep us our left and right lateral limits in check. If we're say yes to 53 feet and then the next time we try to change it, you need to come in and say, no, that's not what you're discussing this time.
So do
But-
we need to be more specific then in giving preliminary approval?
I think we need to be definitely more dedicated to our decision on conceptuals and not beat it up so much and not try to design for it.
Yeah.
So the idea is if we come in with a building for conceptual, they haven't put a lot of work into conceptual generally. Generally, it'd be a couple elevations, the litmus paper test. And what I've found often, people will come in with something actually bigger than they really want to build to see how far they can go. And so it's our job to kind of figure out, does it fit? Does it fit the guidelines that were handed to us? And then go back and look at new construction versus, additions to existing historic fabric. Because there's a contextual difference there. Or maybe a building adjacent to a historic structure, how it fits or doesn't fit. We still need to have that dialogue so that we don't give conceptual to something we really don't think is appropriate. And if we give conceptual, and it should be limited amount of information on a conceptual. It's not what color bricks
You
you're
don't get into the
using.
weeds.
What's your mortar color? Well, I don't want to hear that. What I want to see in conceptual is where are you putting it? How tall is it going to be? How wide is it going to be? And potentially, we don't really care about the use, but how does it affect the use of other properties?
The question, Mr. Chairman, so is that new construction only? What about renovations and smaller things? Do we need to have that third step in something that should be almost done at staff level anyway? Because the last thing I think should do is make this more, protracted of a process. If somebody's got a small project over on Duke Street or whatever, did they have to go through conceptual?
No.
Preliminary, final? So
I
what?
think we've already determined that we
So
can
it's
go
just-
right to final with a lot of projects. It's just, there's some that they're not ready and shouldn't.
The large, more controversial, if you will.
I mean, single family residences are common now to be final on first application, but there are.
Yeah, we're kind of letting it up to both the applicant and how it comes through.
So it's their
So if you haven't noticed, a lot of stuff's going
Fine.
straight to
Well,
final.
Well, we have enough, I think we have enough history now in the recent last, say, 10 years of infill development that you kind of get a taste of where things are. Because there's two components. There's a historic overlay that we're trying to apply in this board's decision logic. And then there's a building codes component that what you can build. I mean, we can approve something they can't build if we're not careful. So, that's why the TRC and HTRC are important, because Bruce's office gets to sit down there and tell them, no, you can't set the building in the setback, or no, you can't use that alley or whatever. All those things are hopefully determined before it gets to us at this level. And a final, I'm actually a little bit amazed that some of the finals come through or just don't seem to have enough information, really. I mean, we beat up the one man on the fireplace how many times
Yeah.
on the chimney? I mean, somebody just got to say, no, this is what you're doing, or we're not approving it. But that's a little house with one real problem.
Yeah.
Anyways,
But final, again, when things come for final, it ought to be almost just a slam dunk. It should be vetted by that point. The staff should have.
if they're asking if the staff gives it to us for final, it ought to be a slam dunk,
Right.
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
In other words, we don't want you to bring us something that you've already had all kind of problems with, but they insist,
We're unwinding and starting over.
yeah, that we're.
But at the same time, it is the citizens' right to go straight to final if they want to. They can
Right,
skip HTRC and everything else and go straight to final.
you got due process, right?
Right. At their own peril,
Except for him, so I don't know.
except for who?
Except for you.
Yeah, I'm not allowed.
I don't know. I
Beware.
don't know if,
And they are paying to do this, you know that, right? So they're paying monies to actually come
Right.
before the board, so we got to take it seriously.
Yeah, for all that paper.
Any other business for the board, Mr. Staffman?
No, I would want to, should pass on that the Washington Street Park that had the, like the band shell, they did actually take the committee met, I'm on the committee, but they took your recommendations. I think you approved it, but you recommended they basically do it at a grade instead of, it was raised like 2 or 2.5 feet.
Yeah, we were afraid
So-
they'd fall off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it saved the city a lot of money. And so they are,
good.
and there were safety issues. So they've had to get, we don't have to put all those railings and steps and all that kind of stuff. So,
Oh, that's great.
been approved with the alternative at grade design, so.
Nice.
That's perfect.
I still think you guys need a
Save the
PR.
city at least 6 figures, so. You're right.
That's good. When do we get our raise?
You guys still need to get like a PR department to celebrate the wins, because it's
Yes,
still
we should.
a lot easier to do business in the city of Beaufort than it is in the county.
All right, we had a motion to adjourn. Anybody gonna debate it? I don't think so.
Mike's like, get this guy out of here.